There haven't been many vehicles in the last 5 years I've been looking forward to as much as this new Land Rover Defender. No, it's not exciting like a Toyota Supra, but there's something about the legend of this thing, mixed with the fact we haven't been able to buy it here in so long, that's had me about as hyped as anyone else. And the good news is, if you feel that way too, you're definitely not going to be disappointed in what this has to offer. But if you're buying it as your average family SUV, there are a few things you should know first. No, the warning here isn't quite the same as the one I would issue to people shopping for a Jeep Wrangler, but just like that thing, this is a purpose-built off-roader before it's anything else, and that means there are some inherent compromises you need to keep in mind. And when you think about it, this is basically just a Wrangler, but for people with bigger budgets. And if you look at it, even in the very concept that's executed, it's very similar. No, you can't take the roof and doors off, but you can get this in both 2- and 4-door versions, and it's engineered for the trail. It's also kind of similar to a Mercedes G-Wagon. No, it doesn't quite have the same cachet, but the concept is very similar. I also love the presence this thing's got. It's got that same kind of retro-inspired coolness of a car like the Dodge Challenger, but it's got that same rugged swagger as the Wrangler or even the Toyota 4Runner TRD Pro. And speaking of which, you already watched that review, right? Well, if you haven't, now is the perfect time to hit that subscribe button below. But back to this Defender, I am driving the 110, the longer version. It's got 4 doors, but like I said, there is a 2-door version as well. That's really classic, and it's probably the one I would go with, but for families on the go, obviously this 4-door is the better choice. The Defender can also feel just as luxurious as any one of its German rivals. Now, I am driving the base version, so it might not feel like its $76,000 starting price in traditional terms, but I really like it, and this is the way I would order it for sure. Lots of cool materials in here. Now, the seats do have leather, but they're accented by this cool textured fabric that just feels like it's tough. And the same goes with this dash. It's this cool textured rubber. And then there's this neoprene material up here, as well as on the door panels. It's all very cool. And I also really like that you can see some body color through the door panels. Again, it might not quite be that premium vibe, but it's got the rugged thing nailed. There's also this painted stuff on the steering wheel, and I know this is a first world problem, but it's metal and it is very cold to the touch on a morning like this. Granted, this does have a heated steering wheel standard, but if you've got your hands at 9 and 3 like this, if your thumb just slips off and hits one of these spokes, it is very cold until the cabin warms up. Again, I know that's a first world problem, but then again, this is a vehicle for first world people. I also really like the simplicity of the space in here. Everything centers around the middle of the dash. You've got this 10-inch touchscreen and then a bunch of controls beneath that for HVAC and vehicle settings. That is it. It feels really utilitarian and useful in here, but also like it's worth the price tag because it's kind of special. And in that way, it's a bit like blunt stone boots. Yes, it is a little on the pricey side, but it does feel like you know where your money's going and you're getting what you're paying for. There's also loads of space in here. Now, in practical terms, it's about the same size as something like a Jeep Grand Cherokee. It's just a little bit taller and upright, so you do get more headroom, but by most interior measures, it's very similar to that thing, and that means it's perfect for a family of 4. There's also a decent amount of cargo room too. You get 800 liters behind the back seats or 1900 liters with them folded. Now, you can order this thing with a 3rd row of seats as well, but honestly, there's probably better products in the Land Rover lineup if you need a little bit more room for people. But again, for family life, I think this thing is perfectly suited. Tons of space, and it also just feels very livable, again, because it's utilitarian. You don't feel like the kids are gonna scuff it up and scratch it because it's designed to withstand that kind of stuff. The other thing about the Defender is it has the design principles of a bread box, so it's not gonna set the world ablaze from an aerodynamics perspective. It really gets pushed around on windy days. No, again, it's not quite as bad as the Jeep Wrangler, but it is more difficult than your average SUV to keep it moving in a straight line. And the other thing is, it is very noisy. Because it's so tall and upright, it just generates a lot of wind noise. And then these big chunky door mirrors, they only make it worse. And on top of that, Land Rover offers all kinds of accessories that look super cool, but they are incredibly noisy. Just take a look at the one I'm driving. It's got what's called the Explorer Pack, so I've got just about everything the brand offers. I've got these big chunky wheel arch moldings, those big mud flaps, that cargo box on the side, this massive roof rack, and then on top of that, I even have a snorkel here on the A-pillar. I love it. This is definitely the way I would order my Defender, but it's not going to do you any favors in the noise department. A quick point about this snorkel though, there seems to be a misconception of what these are used for. A lot of people do think that they help you drive through deeper water, but that's not the case. What it's supposed to do is breathe cleaner air since it's mounted higher up. It's sucking all that clean air that's closer to the roof line instead of closer to the wheels. So if you're out on a dusty trail or bashing through some sand dunes, you're not gonna suck all that junk into the air cleaner. But don't get me wrong, this thing can drive through plenty of water. According to Land Rover, it's rated to wade 3 feet of water, which is crazy. There's also this really cool wade sensor system you can pull up here on the infotainment system so you can monitor just how deep the water you're driving through is, and it'll issue a warning once you start to get too deep. Very cool stuff. But back to the point, this thing is easily one of the noisiest vehicles I have ever driven, and a big part of the problem is these accessories. And you can order a Defender without them, but I don't see the point, because if you're shopping for one of these, don't you want it to look like this in the first place? There are plenty of more civilized family haulers out there, including ones in the Land Rover lineup. So I do think if you're gonna spring for the Defender, you have to buy it this way because it looks too cool to pass up. It looks like I drove right out of the Sahara and out here onto the street. But then again, all of that noise isn't exactly premium. The last point about all these accessories, well, they do not help when it comes to fuel economy. Now, the one I'm driving is the P400, so it's got a 3-liter V6 that's turbocharged under the hood, and it's paired with a mild hybrid system. Not that it helps with fuel efficiency, but it does make this powertrain very smooth, especially during gear changes. They're almost imperceptible. Outputs 395 horsepower and 406 pound-feet of torque, which is more than enough for this Defender, and it actually feels kind of peppy when you get on the gas pedal, but it sucks back gas in a hurry. Now, weather hasn't been too bad this week, and this is my first time experiencing any snow with the Defender. And I've been sticking to most of my usual routes, which means a lot of secondary highways and back roads. But still, the best I've been able to muster is about 15 liters per 100 kilometers. Yikes. Now, here's the thing. Natural Resources Canada and Jaguar Land Rover Canada, they don't have official fuel economy figures published, but the US EPA does, and it rates this thing at 13.5 liters per 100 kilometers combined, and that's without any of these accessories. Now, let's factor in that I'm doing most of my driving out on the highway, so I should be doing a little bit better this week. Now, imagine if I was actually doing about that 60-40 split highway to city. This thing would only get worse. There is a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine that you can get, and that's the base one that comes in the 90 as well as the Defender 110, but that's actually rated worse by the US EPA, and that thing's rated for about 14 liters per 100 kilometers. I don't get it. These are brand new vehicles. I know the engine technology isn't exactly new, but I was expecting just a little bit more when it came to fuel consumption. Part of the problem at the pumps is all the stuff that makes the Defender so capable in the first place. It's got full-time all-wheel drive and a 2-speed transfer case, so there's a low-range setting if you're out in really rough stuff. And then this 110 model, well, it's got standard air suspension so you can raise and lower it as you need. If you're out on the trail, you can maximize it to 300 millimeters of ground clearance. And that also gives it nearly the same approach angle as a Jeep Wrangler Rubicon and a better departure angle. All that stuff is very handy out on the trail. But considering it's got air suspension, I was expecting something a little bit more comfortable out here on the road, but it really hasn't hit the mark. Don't get me wrong, it's been pretty good, but again, considering it's got air suspension, I was expecting something a little bit more comfortable. Instead, every bump and crack in the road really reverberates through this cabin. And I think a big part of the problem is these massive 20-inch wheels. All that extra unsprung weight isn't helping matters, but it's just not as smooth as I would hope. Though I will point out it is quite nimble. No, the steering feel doesn't give you much, but in terms of agility, I was really surprised at how this thing handles itself. And again, when you get on that gas pedal, it's actually kind of peppy. In fact, it's kind of got a hair trigger throttle. When you get on the gas, it just takes off. But I do love the sound of this engine. It's got a really nice growl to it. At anything above about 2,500 RPM, it sounds fantastic. So how much is one of these new Defenders gonna set you back? Well, if you want that 2-liter version, it starts at right around 65 grand, but this V6 model starts at 76,000 bucks. And then this one I'm driving, well, it's got all kinds of extras. There's that zombie apocalypse accessories kit, a bunch of off-road upgrades, and adaptive cruise control. And once it's all said and done, this thing is 93,000 bucks before tax. That's a lot of money, and you know, I don't mind paying for all the extras. The one thing that's strange to me, heated and ventilated front seats aren't standard. You gotta pay a few $100 more for those to get them up here. And the really weird part is a heated steering wheel, well, that is standard. Very strange, but there is lots of standard stuff that is good, like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto so you can hook your phone up, as well as a bunch of safety equipment like lane keep assist and blind spot monitoring. But the big thing you're paying for here is the presence and capability of this new Defender. So about that capability, I know I've been going on and on about it through this entire video, yet you haven't seen me on a trail. And there are a couple different reasons for that. I decided to make this an on-road review because, let's be honest, I don't think many Defender owners are going to spend much time on the trail to begin with. I can't imagine them bashing up their nearly $100,000 SUVs. And the other problem is, well, most of the trails that I use, they are seasonal, and that means they're already closed for the year. But rest assured, my boss and your favorite co-host, Jody Lai, took a Defender out on a pretty serious trail not too long ago and came away very impressed. And a lot of what she liked, she interacted with through the center part of this dashboard that I was talking about earlier. Remember these controls? Well, yeah, on the surface, they do look like just normal HVAC controls. But if you hit this button between these two dials, suddenly the one on the left becomes a drive mode selector, and that's how you spin through the different terrain response settings. And then there are these buttons on the left to raise and lower the air suspension, engage hill descent control, and even engage that low range gearing I was talking about. There's also a bunch of stuff through this main infotainment display. Hit this 4x4 information button and it pulls up a live look at what's happening with the vehicle. So you have pitch and roll angle as well as the all-wheel drive system so you can see what's happening in real time. There's also terrain response info so you can see those different drive modes and a configurable setting. You can set up to 4 different settings so you can adjust things like the traction control or the differentials. And it's cool because if you're a novice, you can hit this button here and it'll tell you what happens when you're adjusting those differentials. There's also some other info in here like vehicle dimensions. And I know you might be thinking, why do you care about the size of your vehicle? But if you're out on a trail and you're not too sure if you can make it, well, you can pull this up and say, hey, I'm 6'10" with this roof rack on here. Maybe I can't make it under that low branch. I love it. You can also pull up your approach and departure angles, and those will change depending on the height of the suspension. But this isn't just good for off-road stuff, and day-to-day life is made a lot easier by this infotainment system. If you look here, I've got Apple CarPlay. It's very fast responsive. You can also pull up your Google Maps, or even just the base infotainment system has a great navigation. I'm usually not a fan of the built-in systems, but this one is fantastic. It's also got a satellite view. I love it. This is a great system. A lot of automakers could learn a thing or two from Jaguar Land Rover here. To recap, I like the character of the new Defender as well as the capability that's baked into it and how simple it is inside. I don't like all the wind noise you get with the accessories, how terrible it is on gas, or that you have to pay for extras like heated seats. I really don't think this new Defender is for just anyone, so if you're looking for a ride to take the kids to school or drive up to the cottage, this probably isn't it. It's also way worse on gas than it should be, so if you're thinking about using it to just bomb around town, you've officially been warned. But not many vehicles out there look this cool, especially with all these accessories bolted onto it. If you want the world to think you're ready for adventure, this isn't a bad way to do it.